Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to play medical detective. We're diving deep to uncover the quiet, creeping physiological clues of neurodegenerative diseases. We're actually going to map out exactly what happens inside the brain long before any obvious physical or memory symptoms ever show up. It's a fascinating journey into the architecture of the human mind, so let's jump right in. When we talk about the very first subtle clues of cognitive decline, it often starts with a whisper. Families will say something incredibly common, yet heartbreaking, like, he just isn't himself anymore. And according to research from UCI Mind, this is incredibly common. Families almost always notice these subtle shifts in motivation, in patience, or in mood way before memory actually starts to fade. And the reason the mind is shifting is simply because the physical brain already has. To really understand these early behavioral clues, we have to look at the physiological culprit behind it all, brain atrophy. Now, as detailed by the Cleveland Clinic, we have to be clear, this is absolutely not just normal aging. It's an accelerated destructive loss of your brain cells, your neurons, and the critical connections between them. And this results in a very real, measurable decrease in brain volume. Sometimes the shrinkage is focal, meaning it zeroes in and damages just one specific area, but it can also be generalized, basically shrinking the entire brain. And that atrophy, that is the absolute hallmark of a neurodegenerative disease. It's the gradual, relentless loss of highly sensitive groups of neurons. The medical literature shows us that this incredibly complex communication network in our heads basically breaks down due to a toxic cellular environment. Think of it kind of like a factory that's just filling up with toxic waste. You've got misshapen proteins, severe oxidative stress, and massive inflammation that just relentlessly deteriorate and eventually kill off the nerve cells. Now, you might be wondering, what's the actual difference between typical age-related forgetfulness and a genuine, serious warning sign of neurodegeneration? Well, according to the Alzheimer's Association, normal aging might look like occasionally missing a single monthly payment. We all slip up sometimes, right? But Alzheimer's disease, that presents as a complete and total inability to manage a budget altogether. The contrast between the two is really drastic when you look closely. What's honestly so fascinating about the Alzheimer's Association's warning signs is that they prove the clues aren't just hiding in our memory. They're heavily embedded in problem-solving, spatial awareness, and language. For example, normal aging is losing your keys, but then retracing your steps to find them an hour later. A massive warning sign, however, is putting things in highly unusual places, like putting your car keys in the refrigerator and being totally unable to retrace your steps. Sometimes this confusion even leads to uncharacteristic accusations of stealing. And this brings us to a major paradigm shift in our investigation today. We have to ask ourselves, what if the earliest alarm bells are actually behavioral rather than cognitive? Seriously, what if dementia starts with personality, not memory? You see, the frontal and cingulate circuits of our brain sit right at the crossroads of so many neural highways. Because of that, they are exquisitely sensitive to metabolic strain and toxic protein buildup long before the actual memory centers are destroyed. So the crucial takeaway here is that conditions like mild behavioral impairment, or MBI, show us that the mind's braking systems start to wobble well before the memory falters. MBI refers to new, sustained alterations in personality. We're talking about sudden apathy, uncharacteristic irritability, or a sudden loss of empathy, and these changes persist for 6 months or more. These aren't lifelong personality traits resurfacing. They are entirely new, red flag signals from a brain that's under quiet, degenerative stress. When we actually map this out on a timeline, it reveals something staggering. The biological fires in the brain are burning decades before the clinical smoke ever appears. Based on some truly landmark biomarker research, amyloid pathology begins diverging from normal nearly 18 years before symptoms show up. 11 years prior to any noticeable decline, tau protein begins accumulating. By the time cognitive symptoms finally emerge at year 0, this silent structural damage has already been underway for nearly 2 decades. Let that sink in. Okay, so to catch these specific culprits in the act, we have to turn to comprehensive medical reviews, like the incredible data coming out of the Journal of Pharmacognosy and Phytochemistry. Medical forensics really help us categorize the primary disorders that cause these irreversible brain changes, giving us a much clearer picture of exactly what is attacking the nervous system from the inside out. We're basically looking at a lineup of 4 main suspects here, and each one uniquely attacks the nervous system. First, Alzheimer's usually strikes at age 65 or older, directly attacking the memory center, the hippocampus. Then you have Parkinson's, which targets the midbrain, depleting the exact dopamine we need for smooth movement. Huntington's is genetic, driven by a mutated protein, and it can actually onset almost any time in life. And finally, ALS specifically targets our motor neurons in the brain and spinal cord, typically around age 50. Notice how the initial site of the brain damage totally dictates the very first symptoms you see. Alzheimer's attacks learning and memory first via those toxic plaques we mentioned. But Parkinson's targets motor control due to that extreme dopamine loss, which leads to those hallmark tremors. Interestingly enough, because of exactly where that specific damage starts, Parkinson's is very often preceded by a noticeable loss of smell, years and years before the tremors ever even begin. Similarly, genetic mutations and toxic environments act as the literal smoking guns for severe motor deterioration. Huntington's is caused by an inherited genetic stutter, basically a repeating DNA sequence on chromosome 4. ALS, on the other hand, is driven by something called excitotoxicity. That's essentially the brain overstimulating its own cells to death with a massive influx of calcium ions. When you combine that with severe oxidative stress, it perfectly, tragically destroys the motor neurons responsible for all of our voluntary muscle movements. But here is the good news. Medical forensics are advancing incredibly rapidly. Research from the Scholars Research Library points out that the entire medical focus is shifting right now. We're moving away from merely observing late-stage symptoms and moving toward detecting the disease at a microscopic level much, much earlier. We are learning to identify these specialized biomarkers way before the brain damage becomes irreversible. Think of these modern diagnostic tools as microscopic footprints left behind at the scene of the crime, hiding in the blood and spinal fluid. They sound the alarm before the neurons are permanently lost. We've got amyloid beta and tau for Alzheimer's. There's neurofilament light chain, or NFL, which is a fantastic general indicator of neuronal damage across multiple different diseases. For Parkinson's, researchers are successfully using alpha-synuclein and DAT scans. And for ALS, finding elevated levels of a protein called TDP43 serves as a highly critical biomarker. So we wrap up our explainer today by asking this incredibly provocative question. If we can hear the brain's alarm bells decades before the fire even starts, can we finally stop the clock? Why this all matters is simple but profound. Early detection, through those subtle behavioral changes we talked about and these new microscopic biomarkers, that is our greatest hope right now. Identifying the pathology before the cognitive decline hits is the absolute key to preserving the self and unlocking highly targeted future treatments. Thank you so much for joining us as we decoded the mysteries of the brain in today's explainer. Understanding these physiological mechanisms gives us all a massive advantage. Be sure to connect with us. Go ahead and like, share, subscribe, and press the bell icon for more insights just like this. And of course, if you are seeking support, please visit Dr. Gangadhar Physiotherapy and Rehabilitation Center for physical therapy and emergency pain relief treatments. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you on the next explainer.